Hello, everybody. We are back for what is a little different this time. Usually, you all come on and you see that we're doing an event around the Equity Summit. The Equity Summit is not until February. So, for those who've already purchased tickets, we just appreciate you purchasing your ticket this early. What we thought we'd do different this year is to bring on some of our speakers who are going to be part of our Equity Summit in February, bring them on early and give you all a chance to see the work that they're doing in their school district, or the work that they're doing in their businesses and their organizations around equity, and to see if the work that they're doing parallels well with your community, providing tips and strategies and the how-tos, and how really to build a team around this work. We recognize that there's no I in team, and you cannot do this work around equity, diversity, and inclusion on your own. And so, for the next 7 months before the Equity Summit, which will be here before you know it in February 8th through the 10th, 2022, we're going to have some guests come on and talk about how equity shows up in their workspace, the work that they're doing to create a space for students, employees, staff, to have a sense of belonging at work. Also, how do we make things around policy and practices and career advancement? How do we make those areas more equitable? So I'm super stoked, super excited to be doing this, because it's just kind of like a teaser before we get into February. So our special guest today, I want to introduce her just in a minute, near and dear to my heart, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I do want to remind those who are joining us for the first time, and those who know the work that we do. Here's the website for the Equity Summit, www.theequitysummit.com. You can purchase your tickets already. Last year, if you joined us, we had over 150 speakers over 3 days. It was all virtual. We all still in COVID, so we were protecting each other. Over 3 days, 150 speakers, and just had a great turnout. Several thousands of participants in those 3 days. And so we're doing it again. And this time we're going to do it in a different fashion while we still will be virtual. Our location that we're going to be shooting will be in Florida. In Miami, Florida. We're going to be at Florida Memorial University, the only HBCU in Miami. Super excited to be on their campus for those 3 days. So while the conference will still be virtual, we will have some sessions that will take place that all of you will be able to see, the students, the staff, our team. It's just going to be an amazing 3 days. And who wouldn't want to be in Florida in February, right? As cold as it's going to be. So stay tuned for more information on that, but you can always follow us on the website, www.theequitysummit.com, to learn more information. All right. I don't want to belabor the time because I'm super excited about our first episode, and then also our special guest. Miss Vera Johnson comes by way of California. So for all you West Coast folks who are just grabbing your first cup of coffee, I'm on my second cup. Good morning to y'all. She's the Dean of Students at Desert Hot Springs High School in Palm Springs Unified School District. Vera is near and dear to my heart because she is my first cousin. And so we've got a lot of history, not just as educators, but a lot of history as family members. And so it's just exciting to have her on the show this morning. What we'll do for the next few minutes is just give Vera an opportunity to talk about the work that she's doing as a Dean of Students at Desert Hot Springs High School as it pertains to equity, as it pertains to diversity and inclusion. She's been in education for over 25 years. She served in various roles, previously as a school counselor and as a teacher. She currently is a subcommittee chair of the Student Success of the District, their anti-racist coalition, which I want to talk a little bit more about that too, Vera. And she's a trainer of trainers and district presenter for her Conscious Education Workshop. She's doing a whole lot of work around DE&I. We ain't going to be able to tap into it all today, but I do want to hear some of it. Vera, good morning to you. Good afternoon to those who are joining us on the East Coast. Great to have you on this morning. Tell us, just as we start this conversation, First of all, how you even got into the DE&I space? I mean, you've been in education 25 years, previously school counselor, teacher, now dean of students. Did this work land on your desk, or this something that you went after, and why?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jason, for this opportunity. This the opportunity opened up for a variety of reasons. I'm a product of Palm Springs Unified. I went through the school system, I went to college, and then came back to give to my community. And so a lot of people who were in the leadership roles kind of knew about my passions as a student. But once I came back as an educator and these opportunities popped up, my name was also on the list of people who may be interested. So when I was approached, of course it's something that I would be interested in because I wanted to see things change from when I was a student to
Mhm.
now how I can help impact the lives of students. And then it took it a step further because it's not just students, but it's also impacting the lives of staff who then impact our students.
Jerry, you talk about being approached for the work, and a kind of a LinkedIn junkie, and I see so many
Mhm.
of us. When I say us, people of color, particularly women of color, who are in some of these great roles around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you mentioned being approached. Did you feel that in the approach it was genuine, authentic, and it was something that you were excited to be a part of? Or did you feel that you may have been selected or chosen or approached because you are a woman of color?
I would say for both reasons. When I was originally approached, the person who approached me has known me since I was 18 as a high school student. So I believe that our conversations have always been pure, authentic, and cut to the chase. Nothing needed to be sugarcoated. And so our involvement in our work relationship was definitely one for the work. But when you get higher up the food chain, sometimes when you are approached, it makes you wonder, okay, is this going to be an initiative that's going to check a box and then we
Mhm.
just turn the page, or is it going to be something that is going to implement and really affect change? And that's the one thing, as the work became a little bit more involved, before I would want to be a part of it, I wanted to make sure that it once again was not something to check a box, but
Mhm.
that was going to be a policy or something that was going to be long-standing, so that after I left or I wasn't involved, it
Mhm.
would still be able to stand.
Good stuff. Yeah, if you're just joining us, if you're just tuning in, this is the first episode of our Word is Bond podcast, where we are interviewing educators and business folks around equity and looking at how equity shows up in their workspace, how they have been co-creators or creators in curating programs and initiatives to make things more equitable for individuals at their jobs. And we're doing this because nationwide, this has been something that has been needed for quite some time. And I think that the social justice movements and the racial unrest and COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 has really just put things on Front Street. So it's not that these are new issues that we're trying to tackle. It's just now they're being more visible, largely because of social media. But and the time is right. And so I think it's important that we have these continued conversations, ongoing conversations. What is happening? How do we do this work? So that if you're a leader in your space, no matter what city or state you're in, you may grab some gems, some diamonds today and in the future from some of our special guests. So again, Vera, thank you for joining us this morning. You talked a little bit about you growing up in the Palm Springs Unified School District, your product,
Yes.
that school district. And so now that you're an educator, dean of students, doing this work focused and centered on equity, how has the time changed? How has the time changed since you were a student, right? And the fight maybe you had as a student at 15, 16, and 17 to now as a professional. Is it the same? Is it different?
Well, one of the things that I noticed as even a student, I didn't have teachers that looked like me. And before, I never really understood the impact that it would have on me later on in life, or the impact that it could have on others. But then, as an educator, when I then became the only Black teacher that some of my students would have, and the relationship that I would have with them, I'd say, you know what, that's something that I definitely missed out on. So, how can I affect change in the lives of these students, our Black and brown students?
Hmm.
Because our school district is very diverse, but the teaching staff is not. And so to create those relationships with students as an educator, as somebody who is definitely an advocate for them, but I can't, it's not about me saving students. It's about giving them the knowledge so that they know how to advocate for themselves. And if not, then they know the resources on how to get what they need. And I think that's been a shift in education
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't there before.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that commentary. You mentioned diverse demographics. Talk about that for a minute. And I'm putting you on the spot. I don't know if you have these numbers, but I'm very curious, just in the Palm Springs Unified School District, how diverse the student body is. You also mentioned the staff, the leadership. I'm curious to know if it's very similar as it is here on the East Coast, where we have high population of Hispanic and African American students,
Yes.
but a low percentage of African American and Hispanic teachers and leaders.
Yes.
Talk about your demographics just in California, just so that our viewers and listeners know how different their dynamics may be where you are versus where they are.
Well, the demographics that you just described is what we have in Palm Springs Unified. And specifically at my school site, I'd say we're about 70% Hispanic and maybe 4 to 5% um, Black, about maybe 10 to 15% white, and then you have the speckling of others, but definitely the teaching staff isn't representative of that. And we are fortunate that we have a very diverse counseling staff, but that's just one small group of people who have an influence on the lives of students, where the teaching staff, I'd say, is 85%, if not 90% white, along with the leadership that's at the school site. So that definitely has an impact on our students.
Absolutely. Those numbers that you mentioned, don't surprise me as a longstanding educator as well. I just think that the design of school, when schools were no longer segregated,
Mm-hmm.
the design of schools have always kind of been where it's been the majority of white teachers and leaders. And then students of color, has always been pretty high in many
Mm-hmm.
urban school districts, now suburban. And then even when you look into rural areas, you
Yeah.
still see a high number of Hispanic and Black students. I'm curious, before we get into the work that you're doing in your particular school, how your school district feels about some of these numbers you've mentioned. I would assume that it's a challenge for them in wanting to change the landscape. But what is your district doing around the data within these demographics, the recruitment and hiring maybe of teachers of color, programs for students to thrive in a school where it's majority white teachers? What is your district doing?
So one thing that I can say, and like I stated earlier, I definitely make sure that anything that I'm a part of is something that is not just to check a box. So under the direction of our previous superintendent, Dr. Sandy Lyon, that's when our Anti-Racist Coalition was established in July of 2020. And
Mm,
one of the initiatives was, and one of our goals was, um, not human relations, hiring of diverse staff.
okay.
And so, as a result of that initiative, we've put in place questions that you would be able to not necessarily single out, okay, you're not going to be qualified, you are qualified, but we've put some things in place to kind of, okay, before you even apply in our district, you will know what we're about. And we have board policy now that is in
Mm,
place in
mhm.
order to make sure that the goals that we have stated are actually being met. And we would definitely look at them quarterly to say, okay, if indicator is not being met, what do we need to do to make sure that this indicator is being met? And
True.
it's organic and it's changing, so that it's not, okay, so rigid that if this isn't working, this is what we're sticking with. And
Mhm,
that's the one thing I can appreciate with the process that we went through. It was a long, extensive process to get
mhm, mhm.
the board policy in place and to make sure that these indicators were going to actually, if not enact change, definitely bring about the awareness is the first step. And then the
Absolutely.
education is the second step.
And even the name of the coalition you mentioned, Anti-Racist Coalition. I'm just excited to hear that there are um, powers at the top, leaders at the
Mhm.
top, who are not afraid to use language and call out language,
Absolutely.
right? Because there's this whole thing, as you've seen the news and the tabloids around critical race theory, and then schools, a little nervous to use certain words and phrases because they don't want funding to stop.
Right.
It's really good to see that there are some strong school districts that are not afraid to use words and phrases like anti-racism. And I'm imagining, that this also affects, you mentioned policy, but this
Mhm.
affects probably curriculum. Do you have
Yes.
any idea what your school district is doing around culturally relevant pedagogy?
Okay, so one, and I'm glad that you stated being bold about the title of our group, because that was a long, extensive conversation. It's like, is it something that we just kind of sugarcoat and say, okay, this is the work that we're doing, and we're not going to really call it what it is? But no, our superintendent took a stand and said, you know what, we're going to call it what it is. If we don't, then people are going to think that this is not something that we are definitely in favor of and that is important to our district. And if it's not something that you are about, then this is not the place for you.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's
And
great.
so, around the curriculum piece, that is one of our subcommittees of the Anti-Racist Coalition,
Mhm.
is to bring in curriculum that is meeting our students where they are, so that
Mhm.
students see themselves represented not just 1 month out of the year,
Right,
but
right.
it's integrated throughout the
Mhm.
curriculum, so that students show up in all facets, and not just with race, but you have gender identity, you
Mhm.
have ableism, you have all
Mhm.
of these different groups that have been marginalized in the past. But one of the goals of the group, this subcommittee, is to make sure that the curriculum is there. And it's not just, sometimes teachers will say, oh, well, it's extra work, I don't want to have to do this. But no, we're going to make it so that teachers don't have that quote unquote burden, they would call it. And
Mhm.
it's something that is just going to enhance what they're already doing.
What they're already doing, yeah, perfect, as it should be, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's switch gears just for a second. We're 15 minutes in, and I'm just elated to hear about all the things that your school district is doing, the stance that they're taking, and it looks like they're moving in the right direction. What about the work you're doing around equity at your school as the dean of students at Desert Hot Springs High School? What have you been tasked to do, and then what things have you taken ownership over, and make sure that students and staff have an experience in their school that is one of equity?
Well, one of the things that I can say the state of California is doing is trying to eliminate where your consequences are punitive. So, as dean of
Mm.
students, that's usually tasked with only discipline.
Right.
But at my school site, I am doing discipline, but I'm also kind of looking over student wellness as a whole, so that we are able to reach the whole student, which would hopefully then have a trickle down effect to impact their educational experience on campus. If students become escalated in a class, yes, that may be looked at as a behavior issue, but it could be, and in most cases, there are underlying mental health issues that also
Mhm.
need to be addressed. And so, with my counseling background and in this role, I have been tasked with kind of finding a way to make all students have an equitable
Mhm.
experience on campus.
Mhm. Mhm. Tell us about some of the initiatives that you have that are going on now, and then even some that are in the pipeline. I mean, there are
So,
tons of
yes.
folks, Vera, who are so excited about this work, but are unsure where to even begin, right? And
Hmm.
even in the work that we do here at the Bond Educational Group, we always provide resources like books that you can read and resources like articles. But sometimes people don't have the time to spend, reading a 300, 400-page book,
Right.
right? And then figuring out, well, how do I implement what I read? Sometimes hearing from other educators and practitioners about what things they're doing in their district can really ignite some ideas and some passion for other communities. So what things are you working on now related to equity? And then also what things are in the pipeline that are coming up?
Okay, so to take a few steps back, in 2014, we started doing unconscious bias training through the California Teachers Association. And with that, we would have workshops. We were actually attendees, people in our district, to go through unconscious bias training. In 2016, our district said, you know what? This is kind of the beginning of, I'll say, the movement or of the work. And
Mhm.
so we created a team of about 12 educators, and we created a training that was specific and would identify the concerns of educators and students in our district. So from 2016 up until now, we have been having those workshops. That's how we've been trying to help the educators identify their own biases, and then giving them tools and how they can help once they've identified their biases. Okay, how can I then change my thought process so that my students have a different experience? One thing that we didn't call it was a training, it was a workshop. Because with a workshop, you're actually doing work. Training, you sit there and listen to somebody present, and then you walk away and say, okay, here's my certificate.
Right.
But with our workshops, we want it to be something where the work is continuing.
Yeah.
And that's the conscious education part.
Okay.
At my school site, as far as students are concerned, with discipline, we're trying to get away from punitive and look at things in a restorative manner. So the last 2 years before COVID kind of took over and shut us down, we were really trying to meet with, when students had incidents on campus, we would meet with the student, myself, and the teacher so that we can have a restorative conference so that the students understood the impact of their actions. And then hopefully the teachers then had an opportunity to have a conversation with the students so that everybody could understand where they were coming from. And that's something that rarely takes place.
Absolutely.
It's something that's up and coming, but when teachers are able to hear from students and students are able to hear from teachers, they see each other as human beings and not just student teacher. And that has also helped reduce the number of incidents on campus.
So the restorative practices that you all employ, are you keeping students in-house when infractions take place, right?
Oh, yes, that's definitely
when
the
things
first.
happen, they send kids home, and then research shows that the more days you have out of the class, how it affects academics, how it affects career trajectory and graduation completion, right? So are you keeping students in house?
Yes. We and now it's the state of California. That's one of the mandates, that you can't just send kids home for defiance. You have to find other means of correction. And that's been, I think, the challenge for some, because we grew up where, everything was punitive and there was no conversation about it. But now that is the first go-to versus other means of correction is the first go-to versus, okay, 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing.
Yeah. And you talk about how we grew up and our parents believe the teacher.
Yes.
If the teacher said, Vera was cutting up in class, she wasn't paying attention, she was being a class clown.
Yes.
Your mom and your father was probably believing it. In the space we're in now, though, I think that we have to push back because, there are implicit biases, right? That teachers have towards students, and implicit meaning they're unconscious, don't even know that they're exhibiting some of the behavior, or their tone has changed, or body language has shifted. And so we do have to call on the question, could this be a child who's being targeted, right? Targeted because they come from a marginalized community, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's disability. So all of the things you mentioned, are spot on. What in particular, though, in your school, what initiative or program is in place, or are you a part of, even if it's part of the committee, where you can track and measure a year from now, this is what we put in place. Right. Now, this is the progress. This is how well we're doing.
Well, one of the indicators that, if teachers are attending workshops and getting the education, how is that impacting their incidents? If teacher A had 50 incidents with Latino students, but then they went through a workshop or they've done some self-education or something like that, did their level of incidents reduce in their classroom? Also, speaking to the students, oftentimes we're so quick to talk to the educators about things, but the student stories are consistently true about their treatment. It could be something as simple as, and we may take it for granted, but what if a teacher constantly is mispronouncing a student's name in class, and that student is constantly having problems with that teacher? It's those simple things that if you take the time to say, okay, look, teacher A, let's have a conversation about, it's not a nickname. Take the time to spend 5 minutes to know how to pronounce that student's name. Guess what that relationship is going to be between you and that student moving forward.
Yeah, just last night, I don't know if you saw television, but the National Spelling Bee
Yes.
was won by a young African American girl, 14 years old, out of
Yeah.
Louisiana.
Yep.
And the first time, an African American student has won in over 96 years of this competition. And as I was watching last night and then other nights prior, when you talk about the pronunciation of names, it's very interesting how all of the folks who were um, asking the students to spell a question, they pronounced the students' names correctly, first and last, right? So that due diligence, that extra step, that I care about, I
Yes.
care about you just as much as I care about myself. I don't want nobody mispronouncing my name, right?
Right.
it's,
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
that due diligence. It's that extra step, but it's interesting how that extra step, oftentimes to some teachers, to some educators, seems like work.
You see, exactly, and those are some of part of the other things that we work on. Microaggressions. I mean, we've all experienced them, but those little microaggressions that our students experience become huge over the course of time. But if we can try to minimize them, the students experience they will start to experience some little successes, baby steps.
All right, look. So we're gonna end soon, but I want you to share with our listeners and our viewers and those who will watch this later, because all these sessions are recorded. We'll make sure that they're shareable links. Those who are just tuning in, you'll be able to go back and hear from Ms. Vera Johnson, Dean of Students, Desert Hot Springs High School, where she's doing some amazing work in Palm Unified School District around equity. Uh, Vera, if you could talk about, well, talk to, not talk about, but talk to other leaders in education who are in other states, other cities, other districts, who are thinking about outside of workshops with faculty and staff and teachers and trainings,
Mhm.
which I think are happening more and more now than before. What's one or two other things that other school district leaders can think about maybe implementing in their schools to really bring about more equity for students and teachers?
Well, one thing I think on campus is you have to be able to have the courageous conversations around, I'll say, the work. Sometimes people will call the work, and it's just this politically correct term that now is thrown around, and oh, yes, I'm part of the work.
Right.
But you have to be able to not only have your elevator speech about the work, but be able to implement. And like I said, even if it's the name, okay, everybody on campus, you spend the first day of school making sure that as a teacher, you can say each and every student's name on your campus.
Mhm.
Huge. Greet your students at the door and get to know them. Those are two huge things that you could implement. And when I say make it mandatory, you should want to know who's sitting in your class for an hour every day for 180 days.
Mhm.
Those two little things can make a huge difference on your campus, and it has to start at the top. You can have a few teachers that will do it, but those are the teachers that you'll never hear complain about
Mhm.
anything. But the teachers that you're hearing complain about this and that, okay, sit down and listen to their complaints, and then okay, be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, love those ideas. Yeah, I would just add to, while you're getting to know your students, their names, spend time in their communities too.
Yes.
When I taught high school years ago, that I would spend time in the communities of students in my class who I knew felt marginalized, because I wanted them to know that they had an ally, even if I
Mhm.
didn't live in their community, their neighborhood, that they had an ally, somebody who would attend their dance recitals or basketball, or baseball games, or track meet,
Yes.
right, or church events or picnics in the park, right. I wanted to be part of their world as well. And I think that some of the things you mentioned today, from the top down, all the leaders should take that as a note as well. Be part of your community. We serve students
Yes.
in our schools, predominantly Hispanic or predominantly Black, and many of the teachers, as you mentioned, 80-90% may not be from those neighborhoods, right?
Hmm.
As a teacher, wouldn't you feel the call to want to spend time in the community, right, that your students come from?
Develop relationships.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Hey, this has been great. I want to give you some time now to kind of maybe say any last few words about just any of the work that you're doing around equity, and then even where you see this work going, I get a lot of emails oftentimes, Vera, about, is this a trend? Is this a fad? Is this equity, diversity, inclusion work here today, but be gone by next year, right? And I'm an optimist, and I believe this work is going to be around for a very, very long time. But there are some naysayers who believe it's just going to be here just for a short while. Maybe you want to talk about maybe where you see the future of this work going.
The future of the work, I believe equity is always going to be a concern and an issue. People oftentimes get equality and equity confused. And so until we understand the difference between the two and we're able to provide the support for our students to make their educational experience equitable, the work will continue. And as educators, both Jason and myself and our team of people, the warriors in this work, if as long as it becomes a passion of ours, the work will continue. And you're right, there may only be 100 out of 1,000,000 that are doing it, but out of that 100, it will have a trickle and a ripple effect that will then touch others. And so, yes, I am confident, I am an optimist that the work will continue. I'm also a realist that the work needs to continue.
Needs to continue. I like that. Yeah. Well, thank you for the work, Vera, that you do out there on the West Coast. I'm always enamored to learn about, like, the work that we do is very consistent in the sense that we want to see the lives of our students change, transformed, for them to be better than we were when we were in their seat, several years ago, and to prepare them for a world that is more diverse than when you and I were growing up, right? Like you just see so much diversity in every industry, from IT to banking, financial to education. Diversity is everywhere. So while there has been great access for marginalized communities to be in these great industries, now the question is, but now that we're here, how do you make it equitable, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
That's the challenge.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate you. Continue the great work, continue the great fight. Glad to know that it's, even if it's just 100 of us in the trenches, we're just going to ride this thing out. It's always exciting to connect with other like-minded individuals who are doing this work. Best of luck in this upcoming school year. You guys have probably a few more weeks before school begins. Best of luck as your new school year begins. All the new challenges that will come, but at the same time, if you're, as you mentioned, passionate about this work and you have an emotional connection to this work, regardless of the challenges and obstacles that come, we're going to stick it out. So
in it to win it.
Looking forward to having you in February for our Equity Summit. There, the website is at the bottom, www.theequitysummit.com. You heard today from Ms. Vera Johnson, Dean of Students, Desert Hot Springs High School. Well, she will also be part of the Equity Summit that will take place in February in the beautiful state of Florida, Miami. Florida Memorial University College is where we'll be hosting, but the entire event will be virtual. Grab your ticket today. Prices are still very, very reasonable. And let me tell you before I jump why we made prices reasonable. I don't know about y'all educators, but how many conferences, in Vera, we talked about this last night. How many conferences have you had to go to and you register and it costs you $400 for registration, a $200 flight, a $300 hotel stay, and then you still had to pay for your food? And some educating school districts cover the costs, others don't. Some of us pay out of our pocket, right? So to be part of great minds and strategies and practices, right, it costs a whole lot of money, but it really shouldn't. And so the very small fee that is associated with being part of the Equity Summit is small because we want to make sure that educators don't have to pay incredulous dollars to gain information, to do what is right. Isn't it crazy that to do what is right costs you a lot of money?
Yes. Absolutely.
We just try to do what's right. So we'll see you in February. Vera, thank you again for being part of today's episode.
Thank you very much
for the work that you do. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.